Before I get into the gist of the talk, I'm going to start with a story that will hopefully give you a bit of an idea of who I am and I think present a general notion that I want to portray. When I was a sophomore in college, I was going to Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and I was given the opportunity to go study abroad at Rome, and so I needed a visa. And I basically had two options. I either had to go to D.C., or I had to go to like Utah or California to get to the Italian embassy. And I have relatives in Virginia, so my family was going to go there for vacation. And I thought, well, I'll just use that opportunity to get my visa. However, this was about a month and a half before I'd go to Rome. And, the clock is ticking, and sometimes it's a little iffy whether or not things work out with your visa application. But I took the chance, and I said, okay, I'll just set up an appointment when I go to D.C. or when I go to Virginia, and I'll just hope that things work out. So I get there, sometime it's like the end of July or around then. I'm going to school in August, and I had my uncle drop me off at the metro, and my Google Maps is saying, okay, you take this to there, this to there. I get off at this stop. I think it was called Foggy Bottom, if I remember. And I'm just kind of wandering along on the sidewalk, and it's having me walk a really long ways. And there's this workout. I don't know if you've ever seen those playground workout sort of training areas outside. It's kind of strange. I've never really seen that, but it's like, why am I here right now? And anyway, so I keep going, and I get to this place where there's a bridge, 100 feet above me. And there's a highway to my left, there's a highway above me, and there's this kind of river or creek to my right, and I'm on a sidewalk, and my phone is saying I'm supposed to go right. So somehow my phone thought that I could magically go from 100 feet below to 100 feet above, be on this bridge, and go right. And by the way, my phone is now at about 2 or 3%. So it's about to die. My appointment's in maybe 30 minutes. If I don't get to my appointment, I'm not going to be able to go to Rome. My whole semester is screwed up, and I don't know how to get to this place. So if my phone dies, I'm done. So I did something that any sophomore in college would do, and I called my mom, and I asked her, "Hey, Mom, I'm at like 1%. I don't know what to do." She's like, "All right, well, give me a second. I'm going to try to call the advisors, see if they can explain how to get there, because Google Maps isn't working." And so I'm like, okay. And so I keep walking, and I find someone, and I ask them how to get there, and they're like, well, it's up there. I mean, they didn't really help, in other words. So I keep walking, and then my phone dies. And now it's like 15 minutes before my appointment. I'm kind of freaking out. I try to go up around this roundabout way, but then I realize that that's illegal, and if there were a cop there, then I'd really be done for with my appointment. So didn't want to do that, and I come back, and I'm basically at a point where I have no option except one thing. And I did mention there was a creek or river to my right, and so I made the bold move, and I said, I'm going to Rome. We're doing this. And so I had long pants on, so I rolled my pants up all the way to my knees, maybe even past my knees, and I start wading through the creek. And just to give you an idea of the ridiculousness of this, I had a backpack on that had my laptop, my tablet, I had my phone, my wallet, and the things that you normally should have for an appointment like this. So I had all of my most valuable things on me. And I started getting through this, and this is a creek in Washington, D.C. I realized later my uncle told me I could have probably really hurt myself. There's probably little shards of glass in this creek and all that. But anyway, I'm stepping on the stones, and I get to one point where the water gets up. I mean, my recollection is just past my knee. Like, I remember there being water above my knee. And there was one stone, and there was another stone, and I said a little prayer to my guardian angel that I wouldn't fall, and I kind of just leaped. And then I wobbled a little bit, and then I got my balance, and I made it. So anyway, I was like, all right, sweet, I'm going to be a little late, but hopefully the Italians won't be too mean. So I get up, and I get my shoes back on, and I have to kind of Tarzan my way up the hill because there's a lot of vines and all that. So I get to the top, and I don't know how to get there, so I have to ask people, hey, where's the Italian embassy? I look for the Italian flag, and then I finally get there, And I show up, and I'm kind of, I look exhausted. I just look like I just Tarzaned up a hill. And I talk to the guard, and he's like, okay, go, go, go. And I get there, and I look at my backpack. I'm like, okay, I'm getting all my stuff ready for the appointment. And then as I'm doing that, I realized that I had forgotten my passport. And so that was one of the most down moments of my life, because I realized I went through all of that. I was there late, and I thought I was going to make it. And I forgot my passport in Colorado. So I go up to the window, and I very naively, I asked, is there any way you can give me a visa without my passport? And the Italian's like, stupid American. No. So then I have to, I got to make the phone call to my dad, and I didn't want to do that. So I called my mom first, and I let her know what happened, and she goes, oh, your dad's going to be really mad. So then I called my dad, and I was like, hey, Dad, can you mail me my passport, priority mail, so it gets here tomorrow? And he's like, why? Anyway, he ends up sending it. Problem is, the Italians are a little, firm when it comes to their appointments at the embassy. So I still have this day, I should have pulled it up. I have an email of me writing an email to the embassy saying, I messed up my appointment. I know, I'm really dumb. But for the love of God, would you please consider letting me come in? Just take 5 minutes out of your lunch break. Let me come in and give you my visa real quick. I only have a week that I'm in Virginia. I'm getting my passport mailed to me. And if I don't get this, I can't go to Rome. So you could basically, I tried to portray I was basically crying in an email to these Italians. And so I get this email back. My name is Kevin Roerty, by the way. So I get an email back where after this long email of me explaining stuff, it just says, you can see it was forwarded to someone else, and it just says in all caps, Dear Robert, come in at 12:15 sharp. Bye. So I ended up getting the passport. I came in, I got it. It all worked out. But that was very humiliating, to say the least. And it taught me a great deal of perseverance. And so that is why it is relevant for this talk. The talk I'm going to give is practically developing the interior life. And I've got, I think, about 15 just very practical things that I'm going to encourage that you do for the interior life. But the most important thing is just knowing that you want to live the interior life, knowing that you want to do it and you're willing to take the steps necessary. Because a lot of people have really good ideas, or they have these lofty desires. Oh, I want to be such a good person, or I want to do this, and they don't do anything about it. They don't do anything about it. And it's no one else's fault but their own. They're given the grace. I gave a talk at the Fatima Center conference on knowing Jesus through the interior, that God first loved us, knowing Jesus through the interior. But then what do you do with that sense of desire and knowing how to do mental prayer, which is what I gave a talk on before. So that this is how you can orient your life with very practical, concrete habits to live this out day to day. As we get into that, I'm going to start with a quote from Father William Doyle. He was a Jesuit about 100 years ago, and he was a U.S. chaplain. Quote, "A want of will is the chief obstacle to our becoming saints. We are not holy because we do not really wish to become so. A strong will, a resolute will is needed. A will which is not to be broken by difficulties or turned aside by trifling obstacles. A determination to be a saint and not to be faint and falter because the way seems long and hard and narrow." A want of will is the chief obstacle to our becoming saints. That's the bottom line here is, okay, I'm going to give you practical things, but it's up to you whether you implement these on the day-to-day. I was recently at an airport just less than a week ago with our vice president, and we were walking through the airport, and I turned to him and I said, it's just, sometimes it's a temptation to despair, but it really is daunting how many souls go to hell. We're walking around here, and you just wonder what percent of these people, there's so many people here, what percent are going to make it in eternity? And he said, yeah. But the crazy thing is, every single person here is given the grace to become a saint. And yet so many go to hell. So really it does come down to your own decisions. So before I get into the 15 different tips, I want to give a little context for what the interior life is and why these tips in particular are important. And I'm not saying my list is by any means exhaustive. There's so much you can talk about when it comes to interior life because it connects to your entire life as a Catholic. But knowing where you're at in the spiritual life is really important to be able to contextualize what are the first things I should be doing and how do I get to that point of sainthood. So we're going to start with understanding what the first stage in the spiritual life is. So there's 3 stages: the purgative, illuminative, and unitive way of prayer. And those are all connected to our moral and ascetic growth as well. But in particular, in the purgative stage of prayer, which is where most Catholics are, which actually where we would hope most practicing Catholics are. If you're not practicing normally on Sunday, then you wouldn't even be in the first stage because you can't be in mortal sin and be in any of these stages. So that's the first thing. Is prerequisite is just being in a state of grace. And most people think once I'm not committing sins anymore, then I'm basically perfect, right? Actually, that's only like the first half of the second stage of prayer. Stopping venial sin is like halfway, basically. This is a matter of aiming for perfection. So hopefully that's one little point that will knock out any complacency or lukewarmness or whatever that you may have, that I might have, when we embark on the spiritual life. So another point of this purgative stage is that it begins with rooting out mortal sin, and it begins with ordering your life. So you have to say, if I want to live a good spiritual life, and I want to really commit myself to God, what are the practical things I'm doing to get into a routine that is going to lead me to sanctity? Now, this is why religious life is so ingenious, so to speak. It's just, you get there's a life with a routine, and you have obedience, and you're stripped of physical pleasures and so many other things, because that's going to help you get through this purgative stage. It's purgative in the sense that it purges you from a lot of your vices, and it doesn't give you the occasions of sin, even for a lot of venial sins, because you have virtually no choice. It's like socializing or social pressure in a way to not fall into those things. Now there's also pride and vanity and little attachments we have that religious also have to go through as well, but that's why religious life is so ingenious. But everyone who is baptized is called to the life of sanctity, because we're given the life of grace, which gives us the opportunity to be divinized, which is what heaven's all about. So all of us are aiming at that. And so in one way or another, we have to orient our lives so that it's going to guide us toward this sainthood. And especially for us in this world today, this is really crucial to realize that we're so dissipated with technology. I'm using my phone right now to look at my notes. I mean, we're so dissipated with 1,000 different distractions. I think G.K. Chesterton said that we're like stoned to death with pebbles. So many little things here and there. And that's really important to realize that we need to be oriented and order our life so that we're not given the option of being so just pulled by 1,000 different things and forget about the one thing necessary. So that's another contextual piece too. Practically, what am I doing to orient my life? I have to be very intentional if I really want to make this a priority. Okay, so the purgative way and the dissipating world we're in, that's the context for a lot of these tips. So these tips, I mean, it's not an exact categorization, but the different topics that I'm going to cover are what I would say pre-action, spiritual action, maintaining the spiritual action, and then advanced. So first with the pre-action. First tip is have a mission and vision for your life. Now, a lot of times I talk with a lot of young men in the apostolate that I do. So this is particularly for young men, is knowing what is your vision for your life. This proactivity is characteristic of the masculine mindset, so to speak, that you have a sense of where you're going. A woman doesn't want to be with a guy who has just this kind of like, you tell me what to do. Like that's a wimp and that's a loser. You got to be someone that has a vision with your life. But that doesn't mean that it's just men are the only ones who are supposed to think in advance. We're all supposed to use our reason and be prudential about what we're doing. But if we want to look at our spiritual life and say, okay, this is the most important thing in my life, can you actually say, I've thought about where I want to be in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years if God gives you the grace to live that long? Or sometimes you could say it's punishment. But either way, do you have a sense of knowing where you're going? We're rational animals, so you've got to think about where you're going and then think about the steps to get there. I'm not saying you have to go down and write this all out concretely. I like doing that. I think it's very good. If you look at a lot of business organizations, this is something that they have to do because, like I said, you can be pulled by 1,000 different things. And a lot of times, the worst thing is that you see, okay, this thing's not evil in and of itself, so it's good, and then you become attached to a bunch of little good things and you don't do the most important things. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but this gives the whole context. If you can say that this is what I'm aiming for, and this is why it's important because it's going to lead me to heaven and the eternal ecstasy and the seeing the beatific vision, the life of the Trinity, then it's going to motivate you to say, okay, this is the most important thing. And then practically as well, living a genuinely virtuous life. I mean, if you're going to have a family, what is that going to look like? Is it just, moping around, just, watching TV all the time? Or is it a thriving, flourishing family life? And it's not necessarily it shouldn't be a sad one either. That's another, it should be something that it's sacrificial and it takes a soul deep effort to live sanctity. But it's not something that's just, oh, poor me, victimization. That's not what you want to aim for either. So you've got to answer that, and you've got to think about that, especially young men. Okay, so then following that, you've got to have an anti-vision or anti-mission of then this connects to heaven and hell, right? I mean, there's heaven and there's hell. We've got to meditate on both. So just like that in this life, what would happen? And I'm not saying you're going to become a mass murderer. Don't just think, okay, if I were literally the worst person I could possibly be. Just think, if you continued like you were right now, if you lived, and obviously people are in different degrees right now, but if you lived in a mediocre way, according to how you're living right now, if you just stayed in your faults and your bad habits, what would your life end up looking like? What would you end up regretting at the moment of death when you're at your judgment? What would go through your mind then? And think about why this is so, it's disgusting. Living a life of sin is disgusting. It should cause a sense of deep, just blah in your soul when you think about this. And give you a sense of resolve of, okay, I'm going to change this and I want to live for that, the contrasting that what I am, what I do want to live for and what I don't want to live for. You've got to have that sense of motivation. And that's why a lot of these other spiritual practices I say will help give us the practical tools to do that, as well as give us reminders, constant reminders of this first and second different vision. So that was the second tip. First tip, mission. Second, anti-mission, so to speak. Third, following having a sense of mission and purpose in life is having priorities. And priorities is not just like, here are a bunch of things that are important. It's, here are a bunch of things that are important, and here's how I'm going to orient them. Here's how I'm going to say, this is more important than this, and then this, and putting them in place in a hierarchy of priorities so that you can then say, I'm going to take that, and so when you're actually making concrete decisions, you say, I'm living according to these priorities, because this is good, and this is good, and this is good. But a lot of times, some of the biggest conflicts we have when we're living, at least we're not living a totally sinful life, a lot of the conflicts we have is that we have these different goods that we've got to be able to orient. But if you have no sense of, this is more important than this, and this is how I'm going to organize my life, you end up becoming sort of like an animal just pulled by 1,000 different goods, and you don't have any real direction. So having priorities is really important. And this is all going to tie into the spiritual life, because you've got to prioritize the spiritual life. So after priorities number 3, number 4, connected to that, is say no to things. You've got to learn to say no. This is secular wisdom. I mean, I've heard that the most successful people in life, they say no to like 95% of things thrown their way. Or maybe even it's like 99%. It's something crazy like that, because they're focused on the most important thing. That they realize, if I do this one thing well, if I do these few things well, then everything else is going to come with it. So this is something even if you talk to a spiritual director or something, the 3 most important things should be your life of grace, your union with God. Then second, your vocation, whether you're married or you're single or you're in religious life, your vocation is the second most important. And then your duties in life. What are you responsible for? Whether you're a student or you're working or you're religious, whatever it is, you have those 3 things. And obviously they all blend together, and it's not like, well, you should only do one of those, but you have to have the right balance and understand how you can prioritize this all. But then you also have to say no to a lot of other things. Say no to watching YouTube videos at 3 in the morning, and saying no to playing video games up till 2 in the morning, and say no to eating munchies all day. There's a lot of just be able to say no to basic things, or if you're someone who's very social, say no to some social activities. In Denver, this is a huge problem in the Catholic community, and this is what leads to activism, is if you say, okay, I'm popular and I've got all these things to do, I've got all these people I can hang out with, and you're invited out every night, and you're not praying, and you're staying up too late, and you're really tired all the time, and you just feel kind of crappy all the time, then there's some problem there. You're not actually living for some mission, you don't have priorities, and you're not able to say no. So if you're going to say, okay, these are my good ideas, but I can't say no, then what's the point? And I recently just talked to a young man who he's been doing our rule and all that, and he basically for 20 days he did. There's 3 resolutions, and he did one of them twice over the course of 20 days. And I talked to him, and he's like, "Oh, it's going all right. I really just want to do this so much. I really want to pray and all. It's just I don't know. I just didn't do it, but I really want to." And I'm like, "You really want to? You've done for 20 days. You've done one of these 3 things twice." And I pointed out, I'm not trying to be a hard guy, but I said, do you have when are you going to pray? And he's like, "Oh yeah, good point." I was like, he thought it was a rhetorical question. I was like, "No, literally, when are you going to pray today?" He's like, "Oh, that's not rhetorical. Let me think about that." Literally, he didn't even think. He had no plan whatsoever. I compared it to, okay, if you were married and let's say you fell in infidelity, and your spouse is like, "Okay, well, I'm going to forgive you, but what's your plan to not do this?" But what are you going to do? He's like, "Well, I just really don't want to do it anymore. I'm sorry. I really don't want to do it." Okay, what are you going to do? I don't know. You have no plan. You're not going to. How about maybe take yourself out of the situation, the occasion of sin. Don't go to the place there was. Stop talking to the person. Maybe have some steps to get in place. That's a sign of true desire, and that requires saying no to a lot of other things to be able to say yes to the most important things. And this goes for the spiritual life, but connected to your whole life of virtue and living your duties and your state of life well. Especially in a world where you've got 1,000 Facebook friends and all that. I'm guilty of 1,000, but all that kind of stuff, you've got to be able to say what's most important. So tip number 5, routine and schedule. So now that you've got your priorities, you know what you're going to say no to, in order to say yes to the most important things. Now you've got to have a routine and schedule. We're creatures of ritual, so to speak, and so we have to have little rituals, so to speak, in our day. This is another ingenious part of religious life, is they have such a routine schedule. The Mission of John the Baptist, they've got, this is your prayer schedule, but everyone's got to have some kind of routine and schedule for the most important things, as well as just getting up on time, getting enough sleep, having a plan for your day. There's so many other things I'd go over just for living a virtuous life, but I won't go into those details. But have a morning routine, have a night routine. Take 5 minutes, write down what time you're going to start your night routine, what are the different things you're going to do, and in the morning, what you're going to do for the first 30 to 60 minutes of your day. And actually, that's another tip that people who, they basically are practical coaches, so to speak, for living an efficient and effective life. They say just have your first 60 minutes of your day just mapped out so you don't even have to think about it, so you don't waste a bunch of energy on that, rather than, okay, what are the most important tasks or things I have to get done? And I would say this goes a long way for the spiritual life, especially in the morning. The morning is a great time for making sure you have a plan for your day, as well as having your spiritual life prioritized. We're talking about priorities here. This is how you say, this is a priority in my life. It's not just a whim of, I feel like praying now. You've got to have a set schedule. In order to pray at all times, you have to have set times of prayer. And in that routine, include devotionals, include like a morning offering, little things like that. I won't go into all those specific things. You can look that up. But include little devotionals, the angel list, the rosary, that kind of stuff. Okay, so that was what I put in the first category of pre-action, of mission, anti-mission, priorities, say no, routine and schedule. So now moving to the next topic is spiritual action. There's 3 of these. So number 6, the 6th tip, the first of the spiritual action, is the 3 resolutions. This is, I would say, the core of everything, and I'll review this at the end, and I have resources over there for this. But the core of everything that we say, there's different, people say different things, but we think that daily rosary, spiritual reading, and mental prayer is key for just a very baseline daily spiritual life. So what is that? Rosary, I hope I don't need to explain that. At least 5 decades of the Rosary. I would encourage more than 5 decades, but 5 decades of the Rosary, which is actually really a third of the full Rosary. Very feasible for everyone in any state of life to do. Spiritual reading, what is that? Spiritual reading basically helps socialize us. It gives us a sense of reminders of the most important axioms for how we live. And it orients us to the most important things. Like I said at the beginning, if you've got a mission and vision and all that, then spiritual reading is going to say, this is why it's important. It gives you that sense of inertia for your day to live this out. And then mental prayer. Mental prayer is, that's what I talked about in the previous 2 talks, but basically it's this conversation with our Lord. It's the heart of the spiritual life. Like we said, we have the life of grace. We're ordained, so to speak, for the divine life, and we have God dwelling in our soul. And really, mental prayer, St. Teresa says, is something that should permeate all of our spiritual activities and throughout our day. It's, in a certain sense, it's not just one act of the spiritual life, but it is the essence of what the spiritual life is. In the Rosary, at Mass, if you're doing the Liturgy of the Hours, any kind of devotional, if you just have an ejaculatory prayer, any of that is aiming at this union with our Lord in your soul. And so mental prayer is sort of a set time to say, I'm prioritizing this union with God in my soul right now. I will say it again, in order to pray at all times, you have to have set times of prayer. And so what we do is 10 minutes of spiritual reading, at least 20 minutes of mental prayer a day, and the Rosary, I'd encourage. Okay, so tip number 7, learn how to do mental prayer. And again, I've given talks on this. I would say, if you're going to take anything from all that, realize that mental prayer is at its finest a conversation or contemplation or just union with Jesus Christ, our Lord, in our souls. That's it. And I was recently just talking with someone who asked, do you literally mean conversation? Yeah, you can, in your mind, in your heart, in your soul, you can just use words and talk about your day. Whatever is on your mind, you can bring that to our Lord. It's really important that you have that sense of that person. This is what's going to lead to that ultimate union. It's not saying we shouldn't have rote prayers or anything like that, but this adds a dimension of real depth and substance to our prayer. So learn how to do mental prayer, read a book on it, but at the essence of it, it's a conversation with our Lord. And that leads to the heights of prayer later on. Tip number 8, have a regular daily examination of conscience. I won't go into the details of that, but basically have a set time. You could do it, say, before you have lunch and or before you go to bed at night. Bed's a really important one, just to, what did I do today? What did I suck at today? Because we all suck at a lot. How can I get better? That kind of stuff. Just think through it. Don't be overly examining. That's one of the problems in our modern world, is that we want to we want to do too much psychology on ourselves, okay? And we become self-conscious and we think, okay, if I just really understood the depths of all this, you can't do that for yourself. You cannot, and that's actually dangerous. This is when the devil can kind of get in there. What's best is that you're open to the gifts of the Holy Ghost, and those are going to, and through the inspirations, through the gifts of the Holy Ghost, which we get at our baptism, everyone gets, then you will subtly be given certain self-knowledge, and the life of grace will grow organically. And this is also why having really good friends and a spiritual director, etc., that gives us a good surrounding to help us realize these are the areas where I need to grow. But not overthinking it. That's a danger in the spiritual life. And going in there, so to speak, not alone, by realizing that you can't have true self-knowledge unless you have self-knowledge in the light of God. That you're made you're made by God, and with the life of grace, you're made an adopted son of God. And so we can't know truly ourselves unless we know ourselves in light of God, which is on the one hand blessed by this life of grace, and the other hand we're sinful and pitiful. So. Okay, so that's spiritual action. After the kind of pre-action, spiritual action. Now, how do you maintain that? Because this is where a lot of people, I think, get stuck. Okay, yeah, I would do that. Yeah, I would do that. 5 days after you hear a talk like this, I'm not doing it. I give up, get discouraged, get angry, forget about it, go play video games. That's not what we want to happen. Okay, and that's what our apostolate Soka is all about. Is we try to say, okay, here's the basic rule. Now, what are the steps you're going to do that are going to help you keep this in place? So that's why I say maintenance for these next 3. So the first thing I would suggest, and these are just tips. Again, I'm not saying this has to be everyone does this, but this is just a tip. What we do is we just write down our resolutions on with a Google sheet. For example, you could do it on a piece of paper. On the x-axis, spiritual reading, rosary, mental prayer. If you want to add other stuff, you can put it up there. And then the days on the y-axis, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the month, and you just check off, did you do it or not? And the reason why I do this is, you think of so many people today, like in Colorado, they're so green and healthy and, vibrant, and they have their dogs and they go for the walk in the park and they have their personal trainer when they go to the really, vegan gyms and all that. And they're so intense about, this health and working out or whatever. And that's for a bodily good that's going to end so quickly in this vain world that ends like a blink of an eye. And what are we doing to do this for the spiritual life? We who know we've been given the wisdom and the truth of the Catholic faith, what are we doing for the most important, for the one thing necessary? And if we then think about it practically, we know that we need to have some sense of gauging where we're at. And in this purgative stage, now once you get up to the later stages, it's less about the particular actions. But we said at the beginning, we're in the purgative stage, and so we have to order our life. And part of ordering our life is developing the right habits, and part of developing the right habits is just doing the thing. Even when you don't feel like it, I have guys say, well, I don't know if I have the right motive or not. I don't know, I'm not going to do it today or tomorrow because I need to have a rejuvenation and make sure I'm praying with the right spirit. Really what they mean is they want to have consolations, and that's how they know that they're really feeling it, because they're feeling it right. In the beginning, it's a matter of you're going to have times when it feels good and times when it's dry and times when you're distracted, and you have the kind of long-term vision, that's vision again, of loving God, and the way that's manifests, or you can tell the sign of that, is by long-term perseverance. And so persevering in prayer for the long haul, that's a sign of true love and fidelity to our Lord. So just getting there is the most important thing. And tracking will help you realize where you're at. And it's just kind of like with SMART goals. People say, I'm going to set a SMART goal. Specific, measurable, accountable, whatever. This is a way of just, did I do it or not? Starting there. And doing that, we do it for 6 months, and then we add on things and challenge people more. But this is also a part of the whole kind of prioritization thing. You're going to realize that, okay, I didn't do this. Why didn't I do it? And so that leads to the 10th tip is accountability. If you have someone you can talk to, say, show this sheet to once a month or once a week or something like that, and say, okay, ask yourself or tell them what went well, what didn't go well for last week or last month, and what can I do to improve for next month. Very simple, very practical. You're not diving into a whole bunch of inner things. It's not a counseling session. It can be done in 10 minutes. It's very just to the point. But just thinking it through, again, it's using our reason, having a vision, acting it out. This is just common sense, but we tend to lack a lot of common sense, especially in the modern world. So having accountability is going to help a lot with that. And you're going to realize, okay, why didn't I pray? Because I was staying up eating Cheetos or whatever. Or eating Oreos or playing games with my friends or whatever. And we've got to learn to have a sense of discipline with these most important things and say no. So then the 11th maintenance activity I would say is take a day of recollection once a month. A day of recollection is basically, it's supposed to be a day where you sort of retreat, where you recollect yourself. It means become oriented on the most important things. Your faculties, your senses and imagination all are kind of, they're lulled so that you can focus your intellect and will on the spiritual goods that you don't see. And I would add on this, taking a day of recollection can help you reorient your vision. I think a lot of people just go on retreats and they think it's a way of just getting away and that's it, and now I have to go back into the world. But it should be something that reorients you, to gives you vigor in life, because if you have a vision, you realize this is the kind of life I want to live on the day-to-day, and you're rejuvenated, realizing I don't just have to get stuck in a routine that has no sense of purpose, has no sense of grace in it, but God is found in that day-to-day. And that day that you come back is helping you recharge to go into your day-to-day, your routine, your duties, etc. And what we say for the day of recollection, the minimum we say is 2 hours of prayer and fasting on the day. Now, if you find you want to fast on a different day of the month, I recommend really fasting once a week, according to your state of life and health, or more. But taking one day where if you pray more on that day, you think about what's most important. If you really are too busy and you can't take a full day off, take half a day, take a few hours at least, go to the chapel, go to the mountains if you live in Colorado, or just try to find some kind of way to realize what is most important and forget about a lot of the world. Okay, so that was tip number 11, and that was the topic of maintenance. So all of that is sort of just the basics that we try to do in Soka for practical, here's my interior life, here's what I'm going to do to put this in place, make a plan. Now, these last 4 tips in the advanced section are things that I wouldn't suggest that you try to just jump into right away. You might get discouraged, or you might get really excited for a couple days and then drop everything. And that's something that, if you've heard of Exodus 90, I think there's a lot of good things in there that people do. They basically have like 17 resolutions they just do for 90 days that include things like cold showers and fasting on a couple days a week or whatever, and prayer and all that. But one thing that I've seen happen is a lot of guys, they'll do it and then they'll end up crashing at the end of it. It's like, okay, 90 days are up, back to mortal sins. And that's a problem, obviously. So I wouldn't say don't try to aim for too much all at once. Use the concept of compounding, where you get one thing you lay really well, like you're building a wall. You lay one brick really well, and then you lay another brick really well, and you slowly go through it, and then over time you're going to get a really well-built wall, rather than a bunch of bricks thrown on a pile, which is what my inclination would be to do. And our Lord talks about don't build on sand. You want to have a firm foundation. But these are things that you could have as sort of in the purview of, this is what I want to be able to get to. So one thing, the first tip I would have here is taking breaks for recollection. I once asked the priest, in doing apostolic work, I don't think it's just a matter of praying a lot more. Now, you got to have a really strong and pray for quite a while and every day to do a lot really good apostolic work. But there comes a point where you realize just putting in 5 hours of prayer or whatever instead of 2 hours, it's not going to make that much of a difference versus, it could, obviously, but that may not be reasonable or responsible. Probably isn't. But taking breaks frequently can help a lot. This is what the spiritual father said. If you take breaks, then you're going to be recollected through your activities. And that's the goal, is to try to get to the point where you're praying without ceasing, as St. Paul says. And that doesn't mean your intellect is always thinking about that, but your will becomes more and more united. And so by taking little breaks, say, for example, and this is also tied to just practical good sense, if you're studying, for example, take a break every 25 minutes and take a break for 2 to 5 minutes. You could pray a decade of the rosary in that. You get up, walk around, stretch, etc., and then do that again over and over and over. That will help you rejuvenate for your activities as well as keep you rooted in the spiritual life. And so that's just a very practical thing you could do throughout your day. But St. Francis de Sales says that by recollecting ourselves, it's sort of like, putting a little gas on a fire to keep it lit, keep it going. So that's the first sort of advanced step, would be take breaks throughout your day to grow in this presence of God and recollection throughout your day. The next step would be gratitude and journaling. I know that sounds kind of feminine or something, but and I'm not saying that's bad, but I think one of the things, especially when we realize the darkness of the world we're living in, we can get trapped in obsessive, thinking of how bad things are, etc. And that's actually, if all we're doing is thinking about what's bad or wrong, that's how the demons think. Father Ripperger says in one of his talks that the demons are always thinking about what's bad, what's wrong. And so that can be a temptation, a danger for a healthy spiritual life, because St. Ignatius says that, we need to be seeking the spirits of peace. And if you're constantly troubled and anxious about these things, that's not the Spirit of God, and that's not going to be good for your spiritual life. It's not to stick your head in the ground and act like you don't know anything that's bad, but you've got to have a good sense of that. So, this is another secular tip, is just writing down some things you're grateful for. Especially if you want to live charitably, you want to be grateful for the people that God has put in your life, like your family or your close friends, people you can say thank you, and this is obviously very helpful in community life, with religious or in family life. And the journaling piece of that too just helps you process things. Again, helps you bring clarity and light to situations that you may need to process or just think through. It helps you articulate which is a power of our reason to be able to articulate and put words to our thoughts. Okay, so we just did taking breaks and a little journaling gratitude. Number 14, spiritual director. Now, I would say there's a lot of things I can say about this. The first thing is obviously if you're going to try to seek a spiritual director, be very particular about who it is. This is someone who's going to be very intimately connected to where your spiritual life goes. And I've seen it go bad, and it can very much go bad if you don't find a very solid spiritual director who St. Teresa says the best would be someone experienced, someone who has knowledge of the spiritual life, and someone who's zealous. In the beginning, what's most important is that they are zealous, that they're going to encourage you to grow, but especially as you advance, then you want someone that understands the spiritual life well, they know the different stages and all that, and that they have some experience so that they don't lead you to try to run too fast or run too slow, and then you don't end up advancing. So it's very, very important who you choose. On the other hand, I wouldn't encourage getting a spiritual director for everyone. I think that's one of the, on the one hand, we have a scarcity of priests, so that's, a lot on their time. On the other hand, a lot of people say they want to get spiritual direction. They come to a spiritual director. These are priests who work with Soka, they tell me. And these are people from good Catholic apostolates. And they'd be Catholic leaders. And they come to them and they treat it like a counseling session where they just tell about all their problems. And then the priest asks, so what's your prayer life like? And they're like, well, I'm not praying. It's like, okay, there's no spiritual life here for the spiritual director to direct. Okay, so you first got to get a spiritual life in for spiritual direction. I'm not saying don't go to a priest for if you need actual counsel on a decision to be made or something. But a lot of times I think a lot of priests' time is wasted because people come and they just want to get out all their bad feelings and they treat them like they're a counselor. You don't need a priest for that. You can go talk to someone else to be able to talk through problems and stuff. But that's not what spiritual direction is. Spiritual direction is primarily about your spiritual life, making decisions, important decisions that you have to make. And Father Ripperger says you should be striving for or actually praying 45 minutes a day to really reasonably have productive time in spiritual direction. So that's why in Soka what we do is we have the 20 minutes of spiritual or 20 minutes of mental prayer, 10 minutes of spiritual reading, and the rosary to get people to that point where it's reasonable for them, okay, now I'm going to introduce you to Father so-and-so, and he can help direct, when you're receiving deeper contemplation and discernment and all that. But the biggest thing they should say is just, well, you need to start praying, if you're not. So then number 15, advanced, is now frequenting the sacraments. I'm not saying you shouldn't be frequenting them before, but I'm saying if you can go to daily mass more frequently, start doing that. That's not the first thing I would say. I would say just have a basic, very minimal spiritual life before you say, I'm going to start going to daily mass and adding all these other things in place. You first just have a basic spiritual life. Obviously, you need to be fulfilling your precepts as a Catholic and going to confession monthly. But then once you get more advanced, say try to strive for daily mass more. Obviously, if you a Latin mass parish, living near one would be fantastic for this. And maybe go to confession more frequently. And maybe you could do some of the divine office, things like that. These are just little practical things you could throw in. There's more customization according to your state of life. So I'm going to review those 15 and then go over a few dangers real quickly and then conclude with just the sort of simplification, all of it. So the 15, again, were mission and vision, anti-mission and vision, priorities, saying no, routine and schedule. So that's for the pre-action. Then for the spiritual action, number 6, mental prayer, rosary, spiritual reading daily. Number 7, learn how to do mental prayer. It's conversation with Christ. Number 8, daily examination and regular confession. Number 9, this is now maintenance, tracking, basically SMART goals with your spiritual life. Number 10, have accountability with that tracking. Number 11, monthly day of recollection to recall and be rejuvenated for that. Then coming to the more advanced stuff, number 12, recollection breaks. 13, gratitude and journaling. The peace that St. Ignatius talks about. Number 14, find a spiritual director. A good Holy Spiritual director once you have a spiritual life. And then number 15, frequent the sacraments more, daily mass, etc. Okay, so now that you have, those are very practical things. What are some of the obstacles you're going to get? The first thing is just irresolution, that you don't have a resolve to do this. St. Teresa says that you must commit from the very beginning to carry your cross. The devil knows he's lost a soul who's firmly committed to carry their cross, to persevere through dryness, etc. in the spiritual life. But if you don't have a resolve in the beginning, this is not going to happen. Also, there's a danger to isolation or despair, because especially in the world today, you realize I'm going to stop going to occasions of sin. I'm going to stop worldly environments. I'm going to stop certain friendships that lead to gossip and sins or lust, or I'm going to, there's so many different things you have to say no to. Bad humor. That you can get to this sense of isolation. And that's where the devil will come in, and he'll lead to a lot of problems. That'll lead to a lot of problems. And that's why I mentioned the gratitude and journaling. It's really important to St. Ignatius. And expressing that, having a few close friends, having close family members who are devout, and you can have a good time with them, and you can talk to them about things, and they're going to inspire you to live a devout life, not as just a purely sad and mopey thing, but this is truly life-giving and sacrificial and aimed toward eternity. Those are the kind of relationships you want to hold close that will help prevent that isolation to despair that the devil will tempt you to, or scrupulosity that can come from that isolation. Another danger would be that you become prideful with all this. You start doing some of these things and you think, oh, I'm a teacher. And that's what the book, The Soul of the Apostle, is all about not doing, which is activism. Okay, I'm just going to do a bunch of things. Oh, I'm so great. Look at me. I don't need to do this devotion. I don't need to do that. You get a savior complex. You think, oh, I should be telling these other people. And then they look to you and they're like, you're not living this, so you're a hypocrite. You've got to have this integritas, this integrity, in order to really become a true influence for the spiritual life. And St. Teresa says there's a danger for your own spiritual life if you start teaching too early. Another danger would be white knuckling. You try to do too much at once. This is why I said the compounding thing. You do one thing after another, instead of 20 different things all at once, and then afterward you crash. You want to just get one thing in place after another. And then the last one I would say is confusing emotional consolations with progress. Ultimately, you'll be stripped of consolations in the physical sense, but you will be given spiritual delights because your faculties have to be purified. That's what you read the spiritual authors. They say that you go through the dark night of the senses, dark night of the soul later on. But in the beginning, when you very first start prayer, it's kind of hard. You get some consolations, and then they die out, and you get confused. Like, oh, what's going on? Don't confuse that emotional consolation with the spiritual life. Don't say it's bad. Just accept it and take that time to resolve to really will the good, love God, and persevere in your resolutions when you don't feel like it. When you're anxious, when you got 1,000 things on your plate, whatever, things aren't going well, that's when you want to resolve really for proving your love to God, so to speak. Okay, so now we've gone over the tips, the dangers. To conclude, I went over 15 different things. So the basic, essential part of all that is having a daily rule of life for yourself. Mental prayer, spiritual reading, and rosary. That's going to be your bread and butter if you just have it very simple, the essential parts of this, and you can grow and expand from there. Mental prayer, spiritual reading, rosary every single day. If you could do that, everything's going to come together. And I would add at the very end just a little vision and anti-vision for you. There's heaven and there's hell. Hell is torment. If you read what St. Teresa says, she was shown a place in hell for us. St. Teresa of Avila was shown a place in hell by the devil that was prepared for her while she was a nun. And you'd have to read it yourself, but it's horrible. It's this very small thing that was really cramped, and she just heard screeching, and you can't even imagine how horrible the feeling of it is, but even the spiritual desolation that comes with it is even worse than the physical torment that hell is like. And that's, you take little steps in one direction or the other every single day. And in your life, you think, okay, if I lived this mediocre way for the rest of my life, I'm going to be feeling like crap all the time, because you probably feel like crap after I've committed this sin, or I've held on to this addiction, or I've said these uncharitable things, and you feel like crap. You should, at least. If you don't, then hopefully this is pricking your conscience. You realize, I don't want to live like that. And if you keep living a life, if you're not right now living a spiritual life, you're going to live in lukewarmness, and you're going to live a life that doesn't have the spiritual clarity that you should have, that you ought to have, that you were destined to have through your baptism. That's tragic. You just wasted it. This life that you're given so many graces, you will have wasted it. And so many people do that today. Just go to most masses. It's unbelievable. We've been given baptism and nothing changes in our life. It's ridiculous. So that's what you don't want to have happen. But if you do start making daily one habit after another, you can get to the point where you're living like the saints. And you read what the saints are like. I mean, they had, a lot of them, there were crazy miracles that happened in their lives. But even those who didn't, like Saint Therese of Lisieux, she said she had so much suffering but so much joy. She was destined for heaven. She had so much confidence in God. It gave her so much peace of soul. That's what you want to live. If you're living a truly virtuous life, you're living a truly authentic spiritual life. And that's what can happen if you take the steps to pray today, to make a plan to pray today, to make a plan to pray today, to just say, I want to plan. And then slowly move from there. You can work toward that. You can. So I'll close with a quote from a saint who got to the point of sainthood because he had this mindset. Saint Gerard Magella said, quote, "The chance to become a saint is offered me only once. If I do not profit by it, it is gone forever. Since I can have only once the good fortune to become a saint, what shall hinder me from laboring for that end? I have every opportunity to sanctify myself. Yes, I will be a saint." End quote.